Chapter 4. The Weight of Promise. Clara found Nathan at the table that evening, a mug of elderflower tea sending wisps of fragrant steam past his handsome face. The cold had brought color to his prominent cheekbones, and his hair fell untamed across his forehead. The chipped enamel mug, one of their few wedding gifts that had stayed intact, looked fragile against his work-roughened fingers. His dark eyes fixed on the snow angel, glowing blue-white beneath a January moon. The kerosene lamp sent flickering shapes along the kitchen's scarred planks. The coal stove's waning heat scarcely reached the corners of the kitchen, and Nathan had kept his wool sweater on, its elbows patched and repatched until the original fabric was barely visible. Clara had sewn extra flannel into the lining of her dress for warmth. Should she speak? Or would her words only widen the gap between them? "Snow melts," Nathan finally murmured, as if sharing a secret in the dim light. "What do you mean?" "Snow is fleeting. You spend all that time shaping it, and in the end, it's gone. Some things are not meant to last." Pain bloomed beneath her ribs. "Nathan, not everything. Some treasures." She hesitated. "Some treasures need care and faith." He met her stare, his expression raw. "What about us, Clara? What do we need?" She advanced, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "We're like everyone else. We need blessings and forgiveness." "I don't know if I can give you either. Not when I can't forgive myself." She didn't push. Instead, she rested her hand on his shoulder, a silent promise that she wouldn't give up. Yellow lamplight spilled from the windows of Thomas's home in the lane beyond. The brothers' father had built the two homes, connected by a long, narrow garden path now buried under snow. Clara remembered summer evenings when that path had worn flat with constant visits, Thomas's children running between houses, screen doors slapping in the twilight. The following day, Nathan woke early, and his footsteps in the attic, above their bedroom, pulled Clara from her sleep. She knew her husband and understood what he was doing. The Henderson Cradle Commission had awakened ideas in him, and he would study his previous designs, those that had once earned him acclaim throughout the region. The chill of early morning settled over her as she pushed back the covers, the faint light of dawn creeping in through the curtains. She rose, pulling on a buttoned nightgown that extended to her ankles, the fabric a pastel, faded lace that whispered of years gone by. She slipped into a bulky robe, the dense material grazing her legs, and tied it loosely at the waist. She climbed the stairs, following Nathan's movements. As he pored through his father's drawings, she spotted the tissue-wrapped doll she'd hidden away. In those first hopeful years, he'd carved tiny furniture for it, each piece a miniature promise of the nursery they'd planned to fill. He briefly greeted her, and she signaled good morning with a nod. A few minutes later, she padded down the staircase. The kitchen greeted her with the glow of embers in the hearth. She knelt to stir the ashes with a long-handled poker and fed a few logs into the fire. The stairs groaned as Nathan descended, and the musty scent of dust and aged wood floated to greet her. He placed a leather portfolio on the table, the one he hadn't opened since the governor's wife had rejected his masterpiece. He wore a flannel shirt paired with suspenders and sturdy shoes. His wool trousers and a thick vest over his shirt were functional for the January cold. "The Hendersons want me to build their first grandchild's cradle," he said. "Yes, I know, so you've mentioned." He dragged a chair from the table and sat. "Not Thomas. Me Dot." She heated water for coffee on their new electric stove, a modern convenience they'd allowed themselves while continuing to use the coal stove. Outside, automobiles were replacing carriages on Main Street, and the general store sold ready-made furniture from Chicago. Here in Evergreen Hollow, however, people valued things made by hand, with heart. Mrs. Henderson spoke with me yesterday at church. She poured coffee and set his mug before him. She said she continues to discover new carvings on the hope chest you built for her daughter's wedding, even after 5 years. That was before. She returned to the stove to stir a pot of bubbling oatmeal. Before you started caring what people thought? His eyes sparked, keen with remembered pain. Before I learned some people think artistry is presumptuous, that a man should know his place. What kind of place is that? Clara pressed, emboldened by the revelation verse, by the hidden hope she carried. Is your place below Thomas, building functional furniture that challenges no one? Or would you prefer working beside him, each of you offering what God gave you both? The squeak of young boots on frozen porch boards announced James's arrival, his mother's covered willow basket filled with baked goods. Ma sent me with cornbread. He held out the basket. And to tell you, Aunt Margaret's coming. From Chicago. Clara blinked. Today? As soon as the train pulls in. Nathan's head snapped up and Clara knew why. His sister Margaret, the youngest Whitmore, had married a furniture factory owner and relocated. She'd tried to convince Nathan to mass produce his designs when things went bad after the governor's commission. Guess the city life didn't suit her after all, James continued, his boyish face clouding. Pa says she's staying with us a while. Her husband's business. He trailed off, aware he might disclose more than he should. Outside, Josephine hung sheets on the line, the white cotton snapping in a gust. The empty clothesline on Clara's side functioned as an accusation. No children's clothes, no evidence of a lively, active household like Thomas and Josephine. Maybe. Clara touched her waist. Maybe. Your mother will need help, Nathan said gruffly to James, though Clara noted a softening in his tone. With Margaret coming, Thomas's house hardly has room for all his children, let alone guests. Clara stared at him. For the first time in many months, Nathan had referred to his brother by name rather than your father or the practical woodworker. Small steps, significant steps. I'll take your sister some biscuits this afternoon, Clara offered. She should be here by then, and I'll find out what's troubling her. The words surprised her as much as Nathan. She hadn't set foot in Thomas's house since the governor's wife's incident, after Josephine had quietly suggested that Nathan had aimed too high. Margaret's return changed things. All those years ago, she'd introduced Clara to Nathan. She'd noticed the way Clara lingered, watching him work. And now she was home, bearing her own troubles. Nathan stood and collected the portfolio. Clara, he hesitated. Perhaps you can ask Margaret if she remembers my father's pattern for the dovetail joints, the ones on my mother's cradle that she used for all her babies. Don't you remember the pattern? Clara asked. I'd appreciate Margaret's opinion. This wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Nathan headed to his workshop, and his steps seemed lighter. Josephine pulled the sheets from the clothesline, revealing Thomas's house. They'd had grand ambitions once, the four of them, before ego and progress had torn them apart. But now Margaret was coming home, bringing city challenges to their country peace. And Clara hoped she carried her own secret, a new life that would bind these fractured families together. Sometimes healing came in unexpected ways, snow angels melting to nourish the spring flowers, prodigal sisters returning to their origins, a baby developing quietly and surely, waiting for the moment to be revealed. James left with his empty basket, heading down the snowy lane where Thomas's larger house stood. The boy took the long route and stopped in the village, peeking into the display windows of Widow Frontiero's store, which displayed ready-made curtains and mail-order furniture catalogs. Clara had no need for either. Later that day, Clara returned from Wednesday's church service. Her arms ached from folding bandages afterwards for the Ladies' Aid Society, organized by Mrs. Reverend Pembroke. Once a time for quiet reflection, the church service had become another reminder of Nathan's absence. After shedding her coat and boots, she walked to the kitchen and unfolded the local chronicle, tucked inside yesterday's Berkshire Eagle that had been delivered from Pittsfield. The headlines trumpeted the latest radio sales at Bartlett's Emporium. Nathan, in his stubbornness, had refused to buy a radio. Still, Clara dawdled outside the display at Bartlett's Emporium on their rare trips to the county seat, imagining music filling her two quiet evenings. It wasn't only the radio. There were so many things just out of reach. When they visited Greenfield for the holiday market, she felt it again, pausing over soft wool scarves, tracing the delicate embroidery on linen handkerchiefs, and breathing in the scent of spiced cider. Elizabeth Drew's stall, brimming with potted rosemary, thyme, and fragrant cedar wreaths, had drawn a steady stream of customers. As the owner of a well-known conservatory in Greenfield, Elizabeth had a gift for nurturing life even in the depths of winter. Nearby, Nathan's woodworking display featured a sturdy oak rocking chair, a carved hope chest, and a set of nesting tables, each crafted with care. Even his smaller pieces, breadboards and simple stools, had drawn admiration from passers-by. The purr of a motor drew her to the door. Through swirling snow, she recognized Andrew Bennett's shiny Ford Model T, an open top with a back seat. The young lawyer, 2 years graduated from Harvard Law, with his shingle hanging beside the mercantile, had materialized to collect Margaret from the train depot. He'd navigated the icy hill from Wiley's Crossing, 3 miles south. Margaret sat straight-backed next to him, her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze straying to his profile. He was a man who appreciated sophistication, who quoted poetry at church socials, and who, at 39, raised eyebrows among the village's hopeful mothers with his determined bachelorhood. Clara's heart quickened at the sight of her sister-in-law. Margaret had always been the bridge between the brothers until she'd married Edward Parker and his dreams of mechanized furniture factories. "Nathan!" Clara stepped onto the porch and called toward the workshop. "Margaret's here." His tools clattered, then silence. Andrew, a compact man, exited his car with a purposeful stride. His build suggested years of physical work balanced with professional refinement, a man who could as easily discuss legal contracts as chop wood for the winter fire. He assisted Margaret, tipping his felt hat. "Let me help you," he said, carrying the clipped consonants of a Massachusetts accent. He lifted her carpet bag with ease. After thanking Andrew and refusing any further help, Margaret mounted the porch steps, precise and certain, despite whatever had brought her home, and waved a brief goodbye to him. Here she was, wearing a cloche hat that spoke of city refinement, but carrying the same carpet bag she'd taken to Chicago years earlier. Andrew's return wave wasn't casual, but a more formal, almost military gesture, a slight raise of his hand, accompanied by a brief nod. His automobile rumbled, and he adjusted his hat, casting a final glance toward her before vanishing down the street. When Clara ushered Margaret inside, the scent of Cowdy face powder and coffee mingled with the aroma of baking apples, an indulgence Clara had allowed herself despite the week's tight budget. At 28, Margaret had refined her farm girl beauty into a more polished style. She stylishly bobbed her dark hair and didn't follow the trend of thinning her eyebrows to imitate movie actresses. Her eyes, the same chocolate brown shade as Nathan's, held a brightness that belied her anxious arrival. Even her traveling suit, dove gray wool with mother-of-pearl buttons, showed a careful balance between Chicago fashion and rural sensibility. Clara had altered her dress for another winter's use, the hem modestly long. She chose her sturdy black coat for functionality rather than trendiness. Compared to Margaret, Clara felt every bit the village's carpenter's wife. "Clara, darling." Margaret's boots clacked on the uneven floorboards, her embrace quick and fierce. As she pulled back, she studied Clara's face with overly shrewd eyes. "You're glowing, are you?" "I'm not sure." "Not sure? Clara, it's not the kind of thing one guesses at." Clara glanced toward the window, where the lace curtains fluttered from the draft. "It's been a strange few weeks." "Well, strange or not, you look happier than I've seen you in ages. Whoever, or whatever it is, don't let it slip away?" Clara offered a faint smile. "You always jump ahead." "And you always hold back." Margaret pulled off her hat and tossed it onto a chair. "Finally, I can breathe." "Are you hungry or thirsty after your journey?" Clara asked. "Tea, perhaps?" "Thank you." Margaret set down her carpetbag with a thud. "Do you have anything stronger than tea? The train ride was endless, and I could use a real drink." Clara smirked. "I might have a bit of whiskey stashed away, if you promise not to scandalize the neighbors." "Scandalize them? Oh, darling, I'm practically their entertainment," Margaret countered with a laugh, sinking into an armchair with practiced ease. Nathan entered the parlor, sawdust dusting his wool sweater and canvas apron. The narrow front hall, with its walnut wainscoting and brass hat hooks, led like a church aisle to where the women sat. "Maggie." The word scraped in his throat like sandpaper. "No Edward." "Where is your husband?" "In Chicago. He should arrive here any day." Margaret's fingers flexed on the arms of the chair. "He's occupied with his modern efficiency experts. They're studying how to make furniture without human hands ever touching the wood. He intends to bring his factory here, Nathan, to Evergreen Hollow. He's spoken to the Board of Selectmen about purchasing land near the railway station." The mention of the village's governing trio, men who controlled every detail from property deals to road repairs, caused Clara's mouth to twist. She envisioned the roar of machinery, drowning out the muted song of hand tools, the scent of fresh cut wood replaced by coal smoke and steam. "Thomas is offering to help him," Margaret went on, her bitter tone unnerving Clara. "He believes automation is the future, that there's no fighting progress." A tenseness rippled through Nathan's strong frame, as if bracing for a physical blow. His dark eyes fixed on some distant point, and he turned. With deliberate steps, he strode back to his workshop, as proud and wounded as the day the governor's wife had rejected the dining suite that should have enhanced formal dinners on Beacon Hill. His most ambitious project, designed to showcase generations of woodworking tradition. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow conveyed more pain than if he had slammed it. Clara started to follow him, but Margaret's hand on her arm held firm. "There's more," she said. "Edward drew Mrs. Bradford's attention at a Boston charity event. He's also spoken with the State House Purchasing Committee about standardizing furniture for all the state buildings. No more custom pieces, no more—" She glanced toward Nathan's workshop. "No more art that moves hearts to ache." Because progress had no room for such things. Progress marched forward with iron and hot air, crushing skillful techniques under its wheels. Progress demanded efficiency, deaf to the cries of artistry. Clara reflected on the Henderson cradle taking shape under Nathan's hands, of the secret growing beneath her heart, of Margaret sitting in her parlor with Chicago turmoil in her eyes, but home soil under her feet. Some artistry defied standardization. Some hopes refused to be efficient. In the workshop, Nathan created pieces that no machine could match. The real battle wasn't between traditional methods and innovation, between brothers, or even between creativity and commerce. The actual battle was about seeking a solution to appease both, about allowing space for wonder, about choosing kindness over speed, soul over steel. The world's most precious gifts, love, creativity, forgiveness, refused to bow to efficiency's emotionless demands. These were the ideals worth preserving. Come. Clara led Margaret into the kitchen, where she reached up to the highest shelf of the cupboard. Behind the jar of dried chamomile blooms sat Nathan's bottle of whiskey they kept for the rare occasions that called for celebration or courage. She poured a finger's worth into a glass tumbler while the kettle heated her own tea. "Tell me everything," Clara said, setting the tumbler on the table. "We'll figure out how to save both our men from their own stubborn pride." "Thomas is part of this story, too, whether or not Nathan agrees." Margaret sank into a spindle-backed chair. She unwound her scarf, a vivid blue, the color of the morning glories that climbed the workshop walls in early summer. The scarf's fringe trembled, its surface reflecting the weak sunlight that sifted through the lace curtains. "Yes, of course he's a part," Clara agreed. "Thomas traveled to Chicago last month." Margaret's voice carried the same hollowness that Clara recalled from empty churches. "To see Edward's factory." He stood there in a sprawling metal building, vapor hissing overhead like an angry cat, monitoring machines stamping out identical chair legs, dozens per minute. The sound, she shuddered, reminded me of 100 hammers beating the soul out of the wood. "Do you have any idea what he said?" "Who?" "Thomas." Clara glanced toward Nathan's workshop, visible through the wavy kitchen glass, where his tools clinked against lumber. Tap, scrape, whisper, the language that Clara had grown to love. "What did Thomas say?" she asked, returning to the stove. "He said it felt like witnessing a cherished friend die." Clara's hand stilled on the copper kettle, its bottom blackened from years on wood stoves before their new electric range. "He's helping Edward bring the factory here?" "He insists progress is inevitable. At least this way, he's able to preserve a part of the craftsmanship." Margaret's forefinger circled the untouched whiskey tumbler, the amber liquid rippling. "Edward extended a job opportunity to Thomas, a position as factory superintendent. Thomas's hands-on knowledge will bridge the traditional methods with the modern." The afternoon sun glinted on the beveled glass of Nathan's workshop, glass he'd saved for months to buy, insisting that proper light was as crucial a tool as any chisel. Inside, as he fashioned the Henderson cradle, he'd be measuring each curve against an inner vision of perfection that machines could never understand. "There's more." Margaret's voice dropped. The diamond in her wedding set sparkled against the tumbler, not nearly as expensive as what her husband's colleagues' wives wore, but pricier than anything found in Evergreen Hollow. She drank deeply, a soldier's gulp rather than a lady's sip. When she finished, the tumbler met the table with a sharp tap. "The governor's wife is on a modernization committee. She holds court twice a month at her Beacon Hill residence, and all these productivity experts and manufacturers journey to Boston to meet with her. All that effort to argue against handcrafted furniture." Margaret's eyes fell on Clara. "I remember how she looked at you that day when she rejected the dining room suite. Your defense of Nathan's work unsettled her." Clara cradled her steaming cup. She brought it to the table along with yesterday's biscuits, wrapped in a flower sackcloth to keep fresh. At 36, she tried to carry herself with the same dignity and composure that had first attracted Nathan. She was tall and willowy like her mother, with auburn hair that gleamed copper in the sun. Unlike the fashionable waves other women labored for, her hair fell in natural ripples past her shoulders, too thick for the popular bob. When she looked in the mirror, her eyes, a clear gray-green like river stones, held both patience and persistence. Even her navy dress, patched at the elbows, hung on her slender frame with an elegance that made Margaret's expensive traveling suit seem overdressed. "They're pushing for standardization in all state contracts," Margaret continued. "The schools, courthouses, even—" she hesitated, "even the state orphanages and children's homes." "Children's homes?" Clara's hand shifted to her still flat stomach. These children had no parents to fight for them. "They claim handmade furniture is too expensive, too impractical, that children need sturdy pieces that are easily replaced." Margaret reached for a biscuit. "Remember the reading room Nathan furnished for the state home for children?" The kids congregated at the bookcases, telling secrets to the wooden foxes and rabbits he'd hidden for them to find. "I remember," Clara murmured. The thud of boots on icy porch boards preceded Thomas's arrival, and Clara ushered him inside. He resembled a figure from his father's photographs, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a wool suit. However, his clothes couldn't quite disguise the craftsman's manner of carrying himself clean, but not overly polished, reflecting a no-nonsense attitude. At 32, he was younger than Nathan, although responsibility had aged him prematurely. "Margaret left this at my house when she dropped off her suitcase and hat box." He held up a manila-colored envelope. "She was in a hurry, and I didn't have time to speak with her." He still wore his watch fob and good suit from the morning service, where he served as deacon. His face, clean-shaven and composed, carried shadows Clara hadn't noticed during the passing of the peace. The lyrics of "Be Thou My Vision" had resonated throughout the church, sprigs of holly and pine decorating the modest altar. "Did my sister tell you about the factory?" he asked Clara. "Some," Clara replied, catching the scent of bay rum aftershave, the same kind his father had used. "About Edward's plans, about the State House Committee on Industrial Development." He glanced toward the window. "Nathan's working on the Henderson cradle?" he asked. Clara nodded. That's encouraging." Thomas was invariably the person to ease awkward moments whenever he could. He greeted his sister and placed the manila envelope on the table. "I saw Edward's machines. They can manufacture 50 cradles in the time it takes Nathan to create one. Perfect, identical cradles." He touched the window glass, frost melting under his fingertips. "Unfortunately, none will ever make a mother cry." "Is that why you're supporting bringing the factory here?" Margaret asked sharply. "To remind yourself what we're losing?" "I'm helping because—" His knuckles whitened before his hands fell open. "Because our father's legacy deserves better than disappearing completely. Because if someone doesn't stand up for past practices, we'll lose everything." Outside, snow began falling again, each flake perfect and unique, like Nathan's carvings, like the way Thomas's hands moved in unconscious patterns against the window glass, tracing designs only he could see. His hand stopped. "The angel is lovely." "I made it the other day," Clara said, discomfort prickling at Thomas, admiring her child-like imitation of Nathan's artistry. The envelope Margaret kept smoothing offered a change of subject. "What's inside, Margaret?" Clara asked, glancing at her. Edward's contracts for the factory and documents I came across in his office safe. Margaret extracted a yellowed paper and outlined the drawing. This is our father's last design. A cradle with a clockwork mechanism hidden in the base, similar to the workings of a music box. When wound, it would rock steadily for an hour. Thomas's hands moved unconsciously, sketching invisible gears in the air, the same gesture their father made when explaining complex joinery to his sons. Clara inhaled sharply. I assume Nathan isn't aware of this? Margaret shook her head. Father mentioned it would be a gift to his grandchildren. And Edward was studying it, Clara, trying to determine how to mass produce it. He doesn't understand. Each curve, each joint, is meant to be shaped by hand, by a person who understands how wood wants to move. You're describing Nathan, Clara replied. I'm describing both my brothers, Margaret corrected. Nathan's art and Thomas's practicality. Father was wise enough to understand that neither was complete without the other. Clara's gaze rested on her snow angel. In the growing twilight, the wings spread wider, waiting to embrace both brothers, a reminder that some treasures, devotion, beauty, forgiveness, only grew stronger beneath winter's mantle.